How is everybody tonight? Well, it's a lovely group of individuals. I'd like to welcome you. Glad you guys could be in attendance for this. How many of y'all are Seattleites? How many of y'all are original Seattleites? How many of y'all still live in Seattle? All right, we got quite a few. So, all right. So I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Yirim Seck. I'll be opening up tonight. I am a Seattle native, 38 years. Thank you. All right. That's a big accomplishment considering I'm 38. So I've lived in the Central District my whole entire life, 5 blocks away from my original birth home. So when we have this conversation of gentrification and displacement and underrepresented communities, I can tell you that I've seen the change in real time. It's a very sensitive topic for some. Some can relate, some can't. So I'm going to open it up. I'm an artist, activist, teaching artist in the Seattle Public Schools, as well as working with at-risk youth. Davida Ingram, where's she at? Round of applause for Davida. Where's she at? Putting on this lovely event. So I have a piece of music that I would like to share with you guys. It's called Crush on You, but it's not what you think. It's not a love song. Well, it is a love song, but it's about the love of my city and seeing the change happen in real time. So some hear this song and they automatically think that I'm referring to a woman with that's not the case. I'm actually speaking about the city in terms as if she's a woman. You guys following me? All right. So without further ado, I'd like to share this piece with you. My voice is okay? Can you hear the music? Turn the music up. They said they can't hear it. Yeah. You scratched my back and I scratched yours like I'm supposed to. When we first met, I told my friends, yeah, I knocked the loco. Up top city thing, Seattle, what a pretty name. She hit me with that city game, looks fresher than the Northwest rain. Damn. We grew up together. I found solace in your back blocks, alleyways and rap spots, bass heavy off of Alki with your skyline in the backdrop. Yeah, that's what we posed in front of. Now supposedly you posing, you supposed to be 100. Say it bluntly, yeah, you've changed, ease up. Displacing all your people, so I speak up, we've been beat up. Cater to these outsiders with a little bit of paper. If you ain't dipping with these hipsters, stupid pay, then you can't stay with it. Giving up the goodies, erase the local culture, that's code for the lesser. Making room for these investors, just to stay you gotta work. Turning slave for these oppressors, damn, shit's kinda messed up. You know I got a crush on you. If I think about is crushing you, I could say that I'm in love with you. Emotions start to overload when I get to touching you. Together we take W's. Now I think it's time I cut you loose. You used to hug me like my bubble goose. Then I got a brighter view. Change is what we struggle through. I'm so confused. We messed around for 30 some odd years, you my boo thing. But over time you hate me, started changing for some new things. High rises and pot shops kicked me off my own block where we drew squares for hopscotch. Knock, 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 who's there? Looks like it, ain't we? That same house up for sale is my birth home that we can't keep. Property taxes blowing up. Sky cranes keep going up. Tech heads keep showing up. She act like she don't know what's up. Most ain't bold enough to call you on your BS. So I chose to write this love letter. Sincerely signed it PS. I hope you live with regrets. All the love done regressed and got a fella depressed. Burning your facade, exposing all your little secrets. Pimping out for profit. First she played us, then she paused us. We were the lifeblood of this city. Put it simply, you done lost us. These rain clouds hanging heavy. Reflections of my sorrow. Looking forward to some better days. Might not be here come tomorrow still. Yeah. All I think about is crushing you. I could say that I'm in love with you. Emotions start to overload when I get to touching you. Together we take W's. Now I think it's time I cut you loose. You used to hug me like my bubble goose. Then I got a brighter view. Change is what we struggle through. I'm so confused. Crush on you. Crush on you. Thank you very much.
Talking about social justice topics like homelessness is serious business, and it can be triggering for some of us. So speakers tonight, they might be sharing stories that deal with important things and things that require care. So it might be mental health or suicidality or substance use and domestic violence. Our first speaker is going to stay here at home in her story. Bobbi Jenkins worked for the City of Seattle's Human Services Department, which handles the city's homelessness response, for 20 years before she found herself homeless. She's going to talk about how everything we do affects someone else. Please welcome Bobbi Jenkins.
I worked for the City of Seattle Human Services Department for over 19 years. I was a single parent raising 3 beautiful daughters and 2 younger brothers. Today, I have a 13-year-old grandson. I thought that I would retire from the City of Seattle Human Services Department, but a storm was coming and I didn't see it. I ended up not retiring, but instead I suffered a severe lower back injury that led me not to retirement, but to disability, 100%. At that time, my disability kicked in, but there was another part of the storm coming, the economy. The cost of living was rising more and more, but my benefits weren't. And I was in such a lovely situation because I was $1 above being able to get help, but not self-sufficient enough. And so what I did is I ended up having to move because the cost of living was increasing and my benefits weren't keeping up. I found a little place. I thought I would be renting it for like a couple of months. It turned into a 10-year stay. Not only that, the third part of the storm was coming. I suffered a series of disabilities. I am a breast cancer survivor today. I'm 6 years old. But wait a minute, it gets real good. I also suffered a left hip replacement. And with that, bleeding ulcers. You know I was depressed as well. Okay, so anyway, I ended up in the back seat of a car, my car. And my loved ones, let me get it straight, they wanted to help, they did help, but it was just not enough. And so I ended up in the backseat of my car with my cat that you probably saw there, who was a feral, stray, homeless cat. He watched over me, and I shared my car and my food with him. So I said, I looked up, and my soul said, God, this is not living, this is existing. I'm not here to exist. I want to live. So you take my life right now, or you help me. That I didn't know would end up the next day going to Operation Night Watch. Right there on Rainier Avenue in South Jackson, they gave me my first sleeping bag, gloves, socks, and I didn't even realize that I was homeless. I was just looking for a place to die because I was sick and tired of being sick and tired with nothing. And from Night Watch, the Elizabeth Gregory House kicked in. And from there, hope kicked in. People began to reach out. And that's why I'm here today. I want to thank you all because somebody dared to care, a lot of somebodies. Somebody wanted to help us. Because I learned in this struggle of homelessness that everything we do affects somebody else. And we are never alone. But homelessness will take you and grip you to say you by yourself, you're alone, just go ahead and die. Now, I want something from you because you're the reason that I'm here, many of you today. We need your support. We need your money. We need your power, your influence. You know, and you know who I'm talking to. Some of you can speak a word and things will start to happen. Now, I know I'm right on that. Good things will start to happen. We need your influence. We need your care. I need you, you need me, and the answer, the big gun to this homeless thing, it's not about it's not about me, it's all about we. That's the weapon, that's the power, we. Today I'm aspiring to be a writer, and I just want to thank you all and let you know, please, I don't just speak for me. I am a 5-year-old child. I'm a grandmother. I'm a grandfather. I'm disabled. I have special needs. I'm homeless, and I could be you any minute. God bless you. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Michael Brooks. And Michael's story goes like this. Perhaps the most typical interaction for us in Seattle with someone who's homeless is seeing someone on the corner. Michael is going to talk about that.
Imagine you're walking down the street with your friends, enjoying the sunshine, and inevitably a homeless man asks you for a quarter. You would give him the quarter and then continue on with your day without a second thought, not realizing that person is confused, that person is hopeless. My name is Michael Brooks, and I was that person, homeless, helpless, and just bitter. How did it happen? Growing up, I was moved from one aunt's house to another, my whole life growing up, so it created that void. So I suppressed it and went to school, got a job, and did what we were told to do. Well, when I got married, that trauma came back, and I started drinking, doing drugs. Created a lot of tension with me and my wife. So she left me. After missing out on an opportunity of getting my dream job, driving the bus, I moved to Atlanta, where I was on the streets. I was homeless, I was bitter, I was angry. If this wouldn't happen, I wouldn't be homeless. If that didn't happen, I wouldn't be homeless. Not once did I realize, had I addressed that trauma and healed, then I wouldn't be homeless. Forgive me. I remember laying on a grate, talking with this man, and he said, Michael, remember this pain. I said, why would I want to do that? He said, if you remember this pain, it will prevent you from doing the things that cause you to be homeless to begin with. I was floored. I did a lot of self-reflection. By this time, I had a sporadic work history. I had a criminal record. What can I do? How can I get my life back together? Then I realized my problem was the answer. Let me repeat that. My problem was the answer. What other field can I get into where my past can be an asset to help others? Social work. So I moved back home. I met my wife. We had some children. And now I'm a case manager for mental health, helping others who walk the same path I did. Life always has its storms. In the process of this process, my wife had emergency surgery, and as we're in this room right now, she's recovering from a triple back fusion. The landlord decided not to renew our lease, So at the end of this month, we have to find a new place to live, on top of her being bedridden. So that's one of the many reasons how we become homeless. What is homelessness? For me, homelessness is simply lack of permanent housing, lack of purpose, lack of hope, lack of fulfillment. Just like mainstream, like you, people who haven't been experienced by homelessness. But homelessness is a physical manifestation of our emotional turmoil. We all have been through trauma. We all been through trauma. We all have been betrayed. And it's those issues that creates dissension within us. And a homeless man is the physical manifestation of that. This is why we need to come together to help one another. The homeless man can show how to be content, living in a tent or living in a house under a bridge. You can show them how to have coping skills, how to budget. See, it's about people coming together. And that's what social services should do. Any agency can give you a bed, tell you to sign up for DSHS, sign up for Section 8 housing. But what about actually taking that person, helping them heal, helping them become whole, helping them go to school, teaching them budgeting, teaching them about credit repair. So when they leave that agency, they'll be truly self-sufficient. They will be homeowners, they will be healed, and most importantly, they will go back and help someone else. This is what homelessness is all about. This is what the agencies should do. What can you do? Next time you're walking down the street and you see a homeless person, smile, say hello, give them a cup of coffee. It's your opportunity not to live out, but to act out your faith in humanity. Thank you.
We're getting ready for our third speaker, Mark Toner. And Mark's story takes us out of Seattle. Mark is going to tell us about knowing someone who lived in the foothills of the Cascades. Please welcome Mark Toner.
Thank you. My name is Mark Toner, and I'm here to talk to you about the power of positive thought and perception. What does that have to do with homeless, you might ask? This is just a story about a homeless man I dealt with and what I learned from him. What's the public perception of homeless people? They live in our parks, they're crazy, they're criminals. We're going to meet a whole lot of incredible people tonight that those titles don't fit for any of them. But if we repeat those fallacies often enough, does it become true? Is a person a criminal simply because they've been to jail? Because they've been homeless? I've been to jail a lot of times. Does that make me a criminal? I bet you I've been to jail more times than anybody here. I'm a cop, not a criminal. I deal with homeless people all the time. I've been a sheriff's deputy for over 30 years. And the people that I deal with aren't the ones the public see and that we see in the papers. They're the invisible masses that are out there amongst us. This story is about a man I met in 2012. 60 years old, he avoided people. Everyone thought he was crazy. Everywhere he went, he was barefoot. The most I ever saw him wear were plastic produce bags on his otherwise bare feet. He said his name was Frosty. He would do everything he would to avoid telling us what his real name was. When I or my deputies would go talk to him, he'd thrill us with his stories about space travel and adventures in the jungle. He lived under a bridge outside of town in a shallow ditch lined with plastic. He refused all services that we would offer him. He was polite about it, but when we offered him shoes or any footwear, adamant, absolutely not. Eventually, we had to arrest him, trespassing, but that let us fingerprint him. And when we fingerprinted him, we found out who he was and his history. Long history of arrest, trespass, arrest, move, repeat. Homeless crimes. We found out he had been a first sergeant in Vietnam. After the war, he had troubles at home, at work. His family left him. He had nobody, no support. He was lost. We tried to reunite him with his family. In doing so, they said they disowned him. He had been too much of a problem. He disowned them. He was alone. We got the county VA administrator to come out to his camp. They were able to sign him up or approve him for services that he had ignored for decades, medical services, monies. He didn't want them. He wanted to be left alone. Eventually, Frosty was arrested again. This time, I gave him the opportunity of going to a new county diversion program in lieu of jail. He gets shelter and treatment. He was reluctant, but he agreed to go. Jail was not good for Frosty. At the facility, he spoke to doctors, and in doing so, he got the treatment he needed. Medication and counseling, it was immensely powerful for him. Surely he was happy to be in a warm, dry spot. A few weeks later, I found him back underneath the bridge. However, when we spoke to him at this point, he was normal. I'll quote. You could carry a conversation with him, and he had shoes. But off his medication, he backslid to himself, and he trespassed again. In my cop car, driving him back to the diversion facility, and I asked him, I said, Frosty, tell me about your shoes. Why did you avoid them for so long? Because he had been off his medication, he was crazy. I wondered what his rationale would be. He told me, he says, he didn't answer direct. He said, my life is horrible. I've got no family, no future. I want to die. I've got no reason to live, but I'm afraid of it. But when I'm barefoot, I step on sharp rocks, hot pavement, ice, and snow. The first thing that comes to my mind is that. I forget all my other problems. And in Frosty's mind, his perception, if life's not so bad if your biggest problem is a stubbed toe, he was a survivor. That last trip to diversion in 2013 worked. He's got family, he's got future, he's got friends. He taught me a valuable lesson about the power of the mind, perception, and what we could do with ourselves. Frosty's doing well. What I would like to ask of you, what will you be willing to do to help others avoid suffering and have a future? I, for one, I will observe, I will listen, I will be there, I will act. Thank you.
Thank you for Mark's story. You may have noticed that most of our speakers are folks who are directly impacted, and that was intentional, but we did have some folks who were advocates. I'm going to get you ready for our next speaker, and she's also our youngest person. Her name is Karina Mills. She is Alaskan Native and a student at Seattle Pacific University, and she'll be talking about ripples through history.
I should have been a statistic, a dropout, a nobody. I was one of the 22,304 people experiencing homelessness in Washington state. After experiencing abuse and surviving foster care her whole life, my mother developed an addiction that ruined not only her life, but mine as well. Dysfunction wreaked havoc in our home. In middle school, I hated it. I always skipped. Around this time, I met my school counselor, Jamie, who was always there for me. Most days, I was forced to go to school in a cop car because I skipped so much. Unable to pay the bills, we lived without electricity. We were forced to make candles to make light in our home. We didn't have food in the fridge. Some days, I was even sent to charge my mom's phone at my middle school at night. The course of my life was changed forever, and I was forced to couch surf. Day by day turned into several years. Every time I was asked to leave. But thankfully, I got connected with my alternative high school, Sequoia, where Jamie and I both started on the same day. She went from my middle school counselor to my high school counselor, where she always kept an eye on me. My alternative high school, Sequoia, was amazing. They were my family when I didn't have one. My principal, Kelly, featured me as the Everett Herald super kid, and my school nurse, Judy, bought me school shoes when I didn't have the money for them. From the loving care and support, I was able to graduate high school early and maintain a GPA of 4.0. But I was still couch surfing throughout this time. That was about a year ago. Jamie was over it, and she said, "You're coming home with me." And so I came home with her. She's now my adopted mom. I was accepted to Seattle Pacific University over the summer. That was this past summer. I began to start piecing the puzzle together of why I became homeless. I read many books and took many classes, sociology, writing, and psychology, that opened to my eyes that it's a systematic problem, not a personal one. For me, personally, it's because of a generational ripple effect that has affected not only my life, but my grandma's as well. My grandma was sent to a boarding school where she wasn't allowed to speak her native tongue, and my mother was sent to foster care, which in turn affected my life. A ripple effect that has lasted generations, pain that has been felt for centuries. The same pain that my people feel today is the same pain that their ancestors felt centuries ago. James Baldwin once said, "History is not the past, it is the present. We carry our history with us. We are our history." That rings true for me today. Jamie has helped change my history. She has been one teacher who has been a positive role model in my life and an advocate for education always. I'm so thankful for her. One child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world. Jamie has changed my life. My fight isn't over yet. I just finished my first year of college today. And the fear of becoming homeless again still is there, but I always have my family to lean on now. And when times are hard, I remember, grow through what you go through. You might be wondering what you can do to help everyone who is experiencing homelessness. You've heard everyone's stories tonight, but just by you coming here and listening to everyone's stories, you're making a difference by opening your heart to hearing what they have to say. James Baldwin also once said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." And that's exactly what you're doing here tonight. Thank you.
I'm a youth worker that works at the library. I'm not a present-day youth worker, but it was kind of hard to get through Karina's talk without tearing up, right? So just one note on thinking about racial justice and homelessness is indigenous communities make up 1% of our community, but they make up 10% of the communities affected by homelessness. So we heard a beautiful story of changing that, and let's scale that up because people should be at home in their ancestral lands. So our next speaker is Cavan O'Grady, and Cavan's here to talk about a life-changing day.
I first came to Seattle in 2006 from Florida. I thought I had a job as a poker writer, and I was very optimistic about my future, but unfortunately on the way I found out that the job was no longer going to happen because the startup wasn't going to start up. When I came to Seattle, I had no money, I had no contacts, and so for the first 2 years I stayed in such places as the Union Gospel Mission, DSC Shelter, and Pioneer Housing. And when I lost the housing at the end, after 2 years, when I lost a job, I headed to San Francisco. And I had enough money to get there. San Francisco wasn't an accident. A year earlier, I'd seen a documentary called The Bridge, and it was about people who had attempted suicide and also family members and friends of people who had jumped and committed suicide. And one morning, I got there, and it was going to be the end. And I started walking along the bridge, and after a little while, I looked down, and in the past I'd kind of done this before, and I'd seen cement and dark waves, and it'd always been intimidating, but when I looked down, I realized why in the documentary a couple dozen people had committed suicide in the year they filmed it. There were light blues and light greens. It was practically inviting, and it looked like a large pillow. And I realized this was really, I was really going to be able to do this. And I was kind of relieved at first. And for decades, I'm bipolar, and as I walked along the rest of the bridge, I felt, like I said, I felt relieved that I was going to be able to do this. And I finally got to the other end of the bridge, and I didn't know it was on the other side. Well, it turned out to be a rest stop. And I went out to where the people were looking out, and I started hearing languages from all over the world. And suddenly my mind kind of switched. I grew up on Long Island, and I used to go into New York City, and I'd hear languages from all over the world, and it would kind of be like the whole world was there, and there was so much life to it. It always kind of inspired me, and just made me feel great. And that's kind of how I felt at that moment. It went kind of, my mind switched suddenly from death to life. And I also thought, I'm kind of jealous of these people. Here they are in San Francisco vacationing. But then I paused and I thought, well, I'm in the same situation. They may, they might be going to nice hotels tonight, and they might be set for life financially, but right now we're on even ground. And as I looked out, I saw a world-famous bridge, San Francisco in the background, beautiful water boats, and I even saw Alcatraz, which is kind of a symbolic reminder that things could be a lot worse. And I walked all the way across the bridge, and every emotion in my life was going before me, and I didn't know what to make of it all. But finally, when I got to a bus stop on the other side, I was completely calm, and I realized this isn't how it's going to end. I'm not going to allow it to end this way. Thank you. There's the bus stop now. And so I paused and I thought, well, what now? And I thought, well, now I have to go back to Seattle and make something of my life. So that's what I did. Got enough money? Thank you. So I did. I came back here to Seattle, and I just started going to lots of drop-in centers and getting advice and getting mental health assistance as much as I could. And people started suggesting that I become a peer counselor. So I started volunteering at different places. The Recovery Cafe was especially, I volunteered there, was there every day. And DSC, I volunteered there a lot. And finally, a year later, actually the first week of August, exactly a year later, I became a peer counselor and got paid for it. And the decade since has been a struggle, of course, and there's been good years and bad, but I just feel full of hope now that the future is bright. And thank you very much.
Jordan is going to share a story about connections. Please welcome Jordan Iverson.
My name is Jordan, and I've been fortunate enough to work in social services and consider myself to have a pretty decent understanding of programs that support the homeless community in Seattle. I'm also a recovering addict, and I've spent considerable time under the influence with our brothers and sisters living outside. But ultimately, my proximity to the issue ends there. Tonight, I'd like to share the story of a time I met a woman named Star and talk about what I learned from that experience. I met Star one evening as I was walking on Capitol Hill. It was a cold Friday night, and the streets were packed with the usual bar crowd, none of whom appeared to notice her as she sat alone on the pavement. As I passed by, I made eye contact with Star, who saw it as an opportunity to grab my attention and asked if I had a cigarette I could give her. I did, and I gladly shared one. We lit our cigarettes, and I asked her how she was doing that evening. In a very exasperated tone, Star shared with me that she was having a particularly difficult evening and feeling quite lonely. Not knowing what more to say, I apologized and tried my best to empathize with what she was going through. All I could do was attempt to communicate my compassion and understanding. We continued to chat as I offered Star space to vent, something that we all need. With impressive vulnerability, she shared with me that the consuming sense of isolation she was experiencing from both the Friday night bar crowd as well as her street community who was ignoring her too. As our cigarettes were just about through, my opportunity to exit this difficult conversation came. I decided to remain with Star. I had plans that evening to go to a bookstore and spend some introspective time alone, but instead asked Star if she'd like to come with me and said I'd love the company. She smiled widely and happily accepted my invitation. She picked up her backpack and together we walked into the Elliott Bay bookstore. Initially inside, I headed upstairs towards the nonfiction books and Star on the main level towards the art books. I browsed for just a short amount of time, but feeling a desire to further the connection I was forming with Star, returned downstairs where I found her peering over a photographic book on modern art. She explained to me that she really enjoyed modern art, and I suggested we could look at a book together. We sat down across the table from one another and began flipping through the pages. We took turns pointing out various paintings in the book and talking about why we liked them. Without prompting, Star began opening up about her life and the difficulties she had experienced, where she had come from, what brought her to Seattle originally, and why she found herself on the streets currently. She was clearly in need of an ear, and I was happy to listen. Oh, fuck. Give it, Bobby. Here we go. We talked about a lot of things, and Star began just opening up and venting to me. She told me about her time where she had grown up in a physically and emotionally abusive household. She told me about how she'd run away several years ago in an attempt to save herself, only to be forced into a trafficking situation. We found a commonality in our shared struggle with addiction. Her dependency on substances formed as a means to cope with the immense trauma she had experienced. With a painting sadness and a growing sense of anger towards those who had treated her so poorly, I sought in that moment to provide whatever help I could. I quickly turned into a walking list of human resources, drawing on my experience working in social services. I pulled out a piece of paper and a pen and began writing down a list of information about services Star could access in order to get help. As I scribbled ferociously the names and numbers of just about any program or resource I could recall, I was casually interrupted by Star, who looked at me and said, "Jordan, I don't need your help." I was taken aback, but how could she not want my help? I had the solutions to the problems that she was describing. Sensing my confusion, Star calmly said to me, "I don't need your help, but thank you so much for just being with me." It was in that moment I understood exactly what Star was wanting. It was not resources or a stand-in social worker. Star was wanting what she had been wanting since our first cigarette together: connection, to be seen, to be heard, to not feel invisible. I put the piece of paper and pen back in my bag. I exhaled and said, "You're welcome. It was really nice to meet you." We packed up our belongings and we headed out the door. We hugged, said our goodbyes, and turned and walked in opposite directions, no longer strangers to one another. I learned two very important lessons in the time that I spent with Star that have helped me in my effort to better support our brothers and sisters experiencing homelessness. One, that everybody has a unique story. The reasons one may find themselves experiencing homelessness are diverse, complex, and likely accompanied with pain. And two, just say hello. Human connection is such a vital resource, and we all have the capacity to connect if we just allow ourselves to do so. Star reminded me how important and how valuable it can be to simply just be with someone in their time of need. The suffering of those who live outside is so visible that I believe it often prevents people, including myself, from wanting to engage with it. But I remind myself that I'm not responsible for fixing anybody's problems, and I only offer support in the form of resources if I'm asked. But to say hello, to ask someone what their name is, and to attempt to get to know them for who they are, rather than judge or stereotype them simply for where they live, is something we can all do. Thank you.
But our spoken word artist who's coming up, who is someone who I love and respect, and she is very much a truth teller. Kati Taylor is a poet and advocate. She has performed at Intiman Theater, Seattle Public Library, and beyond, including Red's Lounge. She was born and raised in Seattle Central District, and you may have noticed that we've made connections between displacement and gentrification and homelessness. Kati understands from lived experience exactly what homelessness feels like and knows that having a home means more than just having a house. It means caring for the living roots of the community she was born in.
This is just a little piece I wrote. It's called See Me. How do you talk about something that was made by man? How do you talk about something that was created to separate human beings into a class of people? On one side, you got your greedy. The other side, you label people needy. It's all man-made, and it's all bull stuff. Try to respect the kids in the room. They saying, I'm sick and tired of being homeless. I'm sick and tired of being outside. I'm sick and tired of being told when to eat, where to lay, when to sleep, where to be. Most of all, I'm sick and tired of being told to get out, that we don't belong here. I'm tired of having to use the bathroom outside. Tired of the eyes of people looking at me as if I'm some type of monster that doesn't belong in this establishment. Tired of being treated like I don't measure up or I didn't make the cut. Tired of being told, not right now, that fair housing is a process. Tired of being hungry. Tired of being sleep deprived. Tired of being denied proper health care. Tired of being on my feet. Tired of hearing the voices in my head reiterating the fact that this stuff is effing crazy. I was born in this city. Where the F do I belong if it's not where my parents reared me? Every day people are dying out here. Every day we crying out here. Every day is hurting out here. I've been outside all winter and the elements have burnt my face from freezing out here. It's bad enough I'm disabled out here. I'm in a wheelchair out here. I can barely walk out here. Human beings need shelter. I need to be inside where the temperature is regulated, where there is running water so that I can bathe myself and wash my clothes and care and nurture myself and feed myself. I need a job. I need to be loved, to be valued, to be affirmed and uplifted. I need help. Last night, I dropped off a 70-year-old woman who was pulling a 50-pound bag along with her dog and her several other bags. I dropped her off at a shelter where another woman was coming out of the gate screaming and cursing and seemed to be in some sort of hysteria. She was angry about something, and I was afraid to leave the lady there. But she told me, be quiet. Don't say anything. Mind your own business. Because obviously, this is a normal occurrence for her. But it makes me sick inside my body even to talk about it. My gut is all torn up in knots because of the realities that I see in this city every day. The city where the privileged get to do whatever they want and take whatever they want and sit up in their nice houses in these nice buildings and turn their eyes away from the people that are dying out here. Every day just trying to survive in the conditions that are deplorable, inhumane, sick, and twisted, and abusive. Just trying to survive in the conditions. Wait a minute, sorry. Twisted. The people that work at the shelters are so abusive, they cut you down. They make it so you get kicked out of the shelter. They target you, they abuse you. They're just one paycheck away from the streets themselves. But they have the nerve to treat you unjustly and criticize you, to taunt, agitate, and antagonize you. That's not help. There's not enough people helping. And there's too many people feeding off the shortcomings of the people who live outside. Elderly, infants, families with children, singles, disabled, mentally ill, and even their pets are all suffering from this society-inflicted atrocity. Anything that's got to do with culture, you destroy it. You did it with the Jewish, you did it with the indigenous, you robbed, you killed, you murdered, you maimed, you raped, you tried to destroy, you colonized, you gentrified, you tried to call it your discovery, but you're a thief, a murderer. Nobody said you could, you just did. You just took because you're greedy. You have no culture. You have no culture. You have no culture. You don't even know who you are because your culture has been stripped and stole from you. I'm dedicated to my culture. My culture breathes through me, breathes through my skin. It is me. It's part of my soul, part of my spirit, and part of my being. You can't take it from me. We will not be erased. We will stand up proudly and defy racism. We will lock arms and unite against you. You're not welcome here. Who's getting rich off this stuff? We are the change we want to see. We are the answer. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Krystal Marx. Krystal is the wife of an Army combat veteran with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. She's a mother of 4 children, and they're all under 12. She's also a community activist and a nonprofit professional. Please welcome Krystal Marx.
I was 8 years old when I became homeless. My biological mother and I were living in Aberdeen, Washington with her mom, my grandmother, until after one too many fights brought on by my mom's mental illness, she kicked us out. We couch surfed. We lived with my mom's friends until they kicked us out. We lived in her car until she lost it. We lived in other people's cars, and then we lived under the bridge. At that time, I was going to private school with a cute white shirt and the plaid schoolgirl skirt, and I had to keep it clean, because if I didn't, they'd take me away. Well, they did. I moved into Bellevue with my father's family, where we joined a church that preached the prosperity gospel, where you were only saved enough if you looked the part. You were only saved enough if you were cured from the diabetes that you had, which my father was not, and we were asked to leave. And it felt like being kicked out of my grandmother's house all over again. At that time, when I'm trying to form bonds, it was the worst thing that could have happened. 15 years later, I am married to a fantastic Army combat veteran. He's got, you can clap. The anxiety that comes from his severe PTSD brought him to the VA and brought me as his primary caregiver to attend his therapy with him when I could. But because of that, between 2015 and 2017, I missed work too many times, and I left more jobs than I held. I became unemployed. As his caretaker, I found myself unable to provide for our family, especially when he wasn't able to at that time. I was worried that we were going to have to move again. Finally, in 2017, we had been renting a house for 2 years, a house that we were married at under the willow tree in our backyard, when we received a notice from our landlord that our annual lease was moving to month. Not knowing what that meant, I thought, okay, we can handle this, until they told us, no, you're out next month. Everyone said, just buy a house. Your husband's a veteran, use that money and buy a house. Not knowing that it was $6,000 for first, last, and deposit for the house we finally did find a move into. And we had to stay in Burien because I was in the middle of my campaign running for Burien City Council. I was elected. We could not leave the city. I had to stay in Burien, so that $6,000 down payment had to come through, and it did through friends and family. But I was at the food bank looking at my council phone at a multi-million-dollar budget in one hand, and in the other, seeing negative dollars in my personal bank account. Instead of doing fancy meet and greets across the city, I met my constituents in the food bank line as we talked about, gosh, I hope they have chicken this week. Do you think they'll have ground beef, or did someone get to it? These people were similar to me, and I connected over them because representation matters. Unfortunately, a year into my council role, our power was shut off. Because guess what? It doesn't stay on if you don't pay those bills. Our water was shut off. Our van was going to be repossessed again, so our community surrounded us and started a GoFundMe for my family. It saved us. It was the help that we needed, but it also brought a lot of harassment. You see, when you're a public official and you're honest about where you're coming from, people don't tend to like that. They tend to push back. They sent hate mail. They asked, where do your kids sit at school, and are they near a window? They don't need to know that. So even with communities surrounding me, I still felt that pressure of something's gonna happen. I'm gonna be asked to leave. We're gonna lose our house. There's no way we're gonna be able to stay. So I clung to that sense of community. People gave us gift cards that we could actually have a Thanksgiving dinner. They just showed up at our doorstep with a car full of food from Costco, front to back, top to bottom, completely full. We still have some of those groceries right now. So homelessness for me wasn't just about sleeping in cars. my mom's or someone else's. It wasn't about sleeping under a bridge. For me, homelessness is something that I carry on my back for years. It gets heavier and heavier as I think of my children. I became homeless at 8 years old. One of my kids is 8 years old right now. And I'll be damned if I don't think every day about what if this happens to him. This toll of worrying has a toll on my mental health. Worrying about keeping my veteran from being homeless by keeping him in his house in a society that salutes the flag with one hand and flips off the homeless veteran with another. I'm not okay with that. Being homeless to me is a lifetime of feeling poor, and I don't mean financially poor. I mean, I felt poor, and I still do, but we're working on it. Thank you.
I was thinking about the class analysis that's been part of our conversation. And the one thing that I will know from community partnerships at the library is that, unfortunately, some of the most racially integrated places are shelters. It doesn't exist in our regular society the way it exists there. And I wonder what it would look like for us to have a deep consciousness around racial justice, social justice, and economic justice. Our next speaker is Ava Levine. Ava was someone who was born in Louisiana. She's also a veteran who earned a master's degree in social work while raising 2 sons as a single mother. Ava's going to speak to us about how mental health care is important for people experiencing homelessness.
I was raised in Shreveport, Louisiana, the youngest of 5 kids. There were good times. Our family traveled and sang throughout the South, but I faced abuse, and the effects stayed with me for years. My mother and my grandmother were caregivers. Later in life, I felt their influence. I too wanted to help others in need. By the age of 12, the effects of abuse had taken its toll. I felt scared and confused. Sadness and depression hit hard. I received no help. Life went on. I married, and my first son was born in 1984. In 1989, I was blessed with my second son. My marriage did not last. I now needed to support the 3 of us, so I always had 2 jobs. Being a single parent was tough. To keep the boys out of gang life and new opportunities, we moved from Louisiana to Tacoma, Washington. I felt protective and responsible for their care. It was time to start a new life. I joined the military to continue to support my sons. After my service, I felt called to help others. I got my bachelor's degree in psychology and went on to get my master's in social work from UW. I love my job as a therapist. During the day and night, I was on call as an ER social worker. In 2011, the roles switched. Marijuana seemed like a good treatment for lingering depression. It was not. A severe bipolar disorder was triggered, and I was admitted to the ER as a patient. Due to my erratic and dangerous behavior, my partner told me I needed to leave the home. I was homeless. Later, because of my veteran status, I completed forms and received housing. One officer saw my struggle and wanted to help. I was not ready. Major depression and manic episodes escalated over time. I was arrested for theft and trespassing. There was no support services with housing. I had not slept in 2 nights and had smoked marijuana. I crashed my car. By now, I had been evicted from housing twice. I was homeless again. I hit bottom. Then I attended a Marijuana Anonymous meeting, got a sponsor, and I'm working the 12 steps. I love the support. I joined Speak Out Seattle because they are looking for real solutions to homelessness, and I wanted to help. I learned that city leaders were not effective or doing enough to address the issue. We need change. A new grandchild came into my life. I realized that it was up to me to get my life together. I couldn't go on like this. I needed help. My family began to trust me again. I kept my appointments with Harborview Medical Center. My psychiatrist helped identify meds to stabilize, and I welcomed therapy. My partner and I reconnected. Our home life was restored. We loved to hike, and I found peace in nature. My life was getting back on track, and I was adventurous. I even rode a camel in Israel. I felt myself returning to the healthy and productive life I had known. Now I know that services were offered to me. When no one enabled me and I ran out of options, I was ready for change. It was up to me to make healthy choices for my life. Mental illness, drug addiction, and homelessness were not what I wished for. I saw there were consequences, however, for my actions. Now I hope to inspire others to live a life of love and connection.
Our next speaker is Mindy Woods. Mindy is going to share a story about how a mold infestation displaced her as a single mom and also a mother.
On May 9th of 2011, it was a regular Monday morning. Got my son up for school, got him ready, and drove him over to Briar Terrace Middle School. Dropped him off at the front, and then I drove around to the back farthest parking spot underneath a tree. Because that was unlike any other Monday. 48 hours prior, we had become homeless. My 13-year-old son, Darian, and I had been living in a moldy apartment that had only gotten so bad that it gave us secondary black mold poisoning. Darian ended up in Children's Hospital with mold growing in his esophagus. No matter what I tried, I could not get anybody to come out and acknowledge the problem and fix the problem. So we became homeless. We lost all of our belongings, and we were both sick. Darian also has type 1 diabetes, and I had 5 autoimmune diseases at that time. So secondary mold poisoning only exacerbated all of that. When I got into the car, I pulled out my flip phone with my prepaid cell phone minutes and thought, well, who do you call when you're homeless? Is there a 1-800-I-AM-HOMELESS number? All I could think of was to call the YWCA shelter where I had worked 8 years prior. I called and I left a message, and then I started thinking, well, who else do you call? So I thought of DSHS, churches, shelters, other social service agencies, nonprofits. I had an ongoing list, and the only person that ever returned my phone call was somebody from the YWCA. And they were happy to be able to help me, but unfortunately, they could not get me in for 4 months. Luckily for us, it was summertime. So I continued to call other places in the meantime while we couch surfed. We had one home that we stayed at in Ballard and one out in Mill Creek. I was waiting patiently for this 4 months to go by, but it was becoming ever increasingly difficult to stay in somebody else's house, know that you were a burden, and be ashamed that you were in that position in the first place. I felt like a failure as a mom. I was embarrassed, and I was horrified. At the 4-month mark, the YWCA put us in a motel because they don't mix 13-year-old boys with little girls in shelters. So we stayed in the motel and we pretended like we were on a vacation. We had a microwave, we had a TV, we were able to sleep in our own separate queen-size beds. For 6 weeks, we lived out of our suitcases, and we just continued to go on as if life was normal, but it was anything but. One morning, we were walking out the door to go to school, and I heard another door close, and I looked over, and we ran into one of my son's best friends and his dad. When I asked him why they were there, he told me that his wife had been having massive seizures and she lost her job, which then put them into foreclosure, and they lost their house. So they were 4 doors down with 2 teenage boys. That's the day, with worry, shame, guilt, embarrassment, and fear, that I decided homelessness can happen to anybody. All it takes is one incident, one job loss, one death in the family, one accident, one rent increase, one identity theft. Nobody is immune to homelessness. Nobody. So that morning, I went into the school office and I told them what was going on. And I told them, I said, I'm a veteran. I have resources. I have some college education. And the homeless liaison told me, it happens to everybody. And I said, but I have a child with type 1 diabetes who needs his insulin refrigerated. He needs to eat stable and healthy meals at regular intervals to keep his blood sugar level. And she told me, it's okay. This happens to many people. We have lots of families in the same position. That horrified me. I could not believe that there were that many people that were experiencing what we were experiencing, that they actually needed a homeless liaison at school. And this is up in the Edmonds School District, where people don't think these things happen. So they helped me with my son's school supply list that day. I was able to get the ASB card and the pictures and the planner and all of the things that he needed to start his 7th grade year off as normally as possible. But again, I was horrified. I could not believe that this was happening, and this was happening to us. And then I started getting angry, and that's when I started to rise up. And after that, our car broke down, and my friend's husband had to drive us to the shelter one night, and I was horrified he was going to find out, because I hadn't told anybody else. And as we got closer to the shelter, the fear was gripping my throat, and I thought, this is it. They're all going to know. We are homeless. Thank you.
You know, one of the powerful things about Mindy's story is that there's a lot of different types of homelessness in our city. But family homelessness is often invisibilized. So when we think about it, there are kids that are going to school and they may not have shelter at the end of the day, and their caregivers are trying to figure it out. So that part of Mindy's story was incredibly profound. And alongside of that, there's youth homelessness and adult homelessness. So towards the end of the program, we are going to bring up some things that you can do, especially if you happen to be sheltered. And because our city is increasingly becoming unaffordable, our ability to stay united and think about how to share information. I work at the library, and I like that the library is invested in social justice and prioritizing equity. It's hard work, it takes accountability, and listening to the most affected is part of that. Our next speaker is David Sorrentino. David is a disabled veteran who took a 2,700-mile bike ride to raise awareness for other disabled veterans. David is going to speak about what began his journey around homelessness, and he's also going to share more about his dream of joining that race and being part of the world's longest mountain bike race and how it helped rebuild his life.
How come half of you are shaking your head like, no way, 2,750 miles? That's nuts. Well, it could be construed as nuts, but it's a lot of fun, that kind of nuts. It's called the Great Divide Mountain Bike Race. It goes from Banff, Canada to Antelope Wells, Mexico, 2,750 miles. It's considered the world's toughest endurance race, and for good reason. You have to carry your bike up 17 miles of rock-strewn scree mountain. You have to cross over snowy passes. You spend countless days all alone thinking every thought you've ever thought in your life 3 times over. You don't have to worry about straining too hard to win the great big award, though, because there is no award at the end other than you got to finish it. Some real great athletes show up to do this, of which I was not one of them. I was never a bicycle racer when I first got interested in this. I got interested in this after I had been injured in the Army. I I had a lot of recovery to do. So I did that recovery on a bicycle, and that bicycle led me to watching things about cycling. And one of those things I watched was a movie about the Tour Divide, the Great Divide mountain bike race. And I decided that because I was having some struggles as a veteran, it would be a great idea as a 100% disabled veteran to hop on a bicycle and go race 2,750 miles. Yeah. Smart like tractor, strong like laptop. But there I was. I got dropped off at the starting line, so I had to do it. And what an experience it was. I got to meet all kinds of animals. Some of them wanted to eat me, but I disallowed that and continued to race along. During that race, I got to meet the most wonderful people. I got to make fantastic connections. I got to talk to homeless vets. I got to talk to vets who loved their athletic life before they were injured and now are going to restart that kind of life. I really, truly believe that a vet, just because he is labeled as disabled, does not mean he is not able to do anything he wants to go out and do. Can you read that? Who in their right mind would do that? I had to go through one section, it's 160 waterless miles. Wait, on a bicycle. That's yeah, you know what? I went back and did it twice more. The reason why I did this was to raise awareness for vets. But what I began to understand is that even though a huge percentage of the homeless population was vets, another huge percentage were disabled also. And they both kind of started to cross over into the same category as those who really had big dreams and desires in their life, and because of an injury or a setback, were no longer able to meet those goals. And to me, homelessness is just as much about losing hope as it is losing your home. And so that's what I wanted to get out and do, was inspire people and find out what their hope was, find out what their dream was, and to re-inspire that. I got to save this little baby lamb. It was stuck in the rocks and bleeding. I had to go carry it 3 miles back to its mother across these big fields, and a great big dog chased me. This is the craziest kind of race you ever could imagine. Look at that. A pair of gloves, the third pair of gloves on that race. You lose about 1,000 a mile. But we achieved heights of 11,972 feet. Try to breathe and pedal a bike at 11,972 feet. It doesn't work. This is an exercise in breathing as much as everything else. I went 3,000 miles by the time I hit the border. Now, I know you're all thinking, 2,750 miles was the race, and he went 3,000 miles. Forget about it. Don't worry about where those extra miles came from. I may have gotten lost once or twice, but not much. I still made it to the end, and boy, what a ride it was. Everything looked like that. It was beautiful. It was incredible to ride down the spline of the Continental Divide on the top of the continent, looking over both sides. We crossed over it 32 times. But in order to do something like that, you've got to train, and you've got to train, and you've got to train harder, and every day. And all my training always took me past this place called the Bindlestick. The Bindlestick is a coffee shop up in Snoqualmie. It is absolutely wonderful. It's like family up there. And I hung out there at the Bindlestick all the time. And I started to get some notoriety as this bicycle racer, of which I was not. But and people thought of me as that. And I ended up in the newspapers. I ended up on King 5 News. I ended up on Channel 5. And I ended up in this great big interview in the Bindlestick one day. And there was all these Bindlestick people that I knew. And they were all there. 25, 30 or more people were gathered around to hear this interview. And so there I was sitting in the stool, and this interviewer from Channel 7 News was asking me a whole bunch of questions. What kind of tent do you use? You know, how many times you change your socks during the day? And then she leaned towards me and she said, "So, Mr. Sorrentino, how long have you been homeless?" I hadn't told anybody. I hadn't told anybody at the Bindlestick that because of my disabilities, that I wasn't able to keep the job that I had. Because the Army deemed me as 100% disabled, they said if I worked, I would lose my disability pension. But they made me wait 3 years before they started paying it. What did they think I was going to do? I had no choice but to use what I knew, how to live with resources in the woods. Just like this guy I met down in Colorado who was doing that, who I helped go get his benefits. I started a campaign, and I got on every news station that would allow me in the Seattle area and said, we need to change this for vets. I started the Great Divide mountain bike race with $89 in my pocket. But that only lasted for 1 hour, because when the VA saw all these news agencies wrapping themselves around me, all of a sudden I had $39,000 in the bank. All of a sudden they could pay it instantly. Wow. Which kind of killed the whole ride. But there's no limits now. Buddha.
Don't know how to contextualize David's story because it's who knew? But I do think it's important for us to think about how things like medical emergencies and big changes of life can be devastating if we don't have a social safety net. And that story is so inspiring, but it also encourages us to think a lot about accessibility and services. And also thinking about those of us who've given service through the military are often disproportionately represented in populations of people who are homeless. So lots to think about there along with that inspiration. But without a doubt, David is a tough act to follow. Our last speaker is Nikki Gane. Nikki is the founder of Dignity for Divas. This is a Seattle not-for-profit that supports women as they transition out of homelessness. Her story is one example of solutions that explore self-care as a way to restore self-worth. But Nikki's also going to share her own experience of becoming homeless as she fled an abusive marriage, and there is a connection between domestic violence and homelessness.
All right. So tonight, I'm going to take you on a journey, my journey out of homelessness. It's a journey many are facing. Now look up there, that's a picture of me, my first night in a shelter. I went to sleeping on floors, couches, pretty much anywhere I could go. And it's something that countless people are facing right now, tonight, right now, not knowing where they're going to go or how they're going to get to their next place. Ask yourself why. Think about it. Right now, there are almost 12,000 men, women, and children experiencing homelessness just in King County. That means there are all these people who don't know where they're going to go. How are they going to figure it out? How is she going to figure it out? Does she deserve to sleep outside because she's old? Maybe her spouse passed away and she doesn't know how to figure it out? Does she deserve to have nowhere to go? Could you imagine the fear of not knowing who's going to protect you at night because you made that one wrong turn, dated that wrong person, took that one hit? We all need to feel safe. Do you believe that people deserve to sleep outside? Because maybe they didn't have all the tools that you had and the support that you had or the know-how. Nobody deserves to sleep outside. Nobody. There are people just like you who go to work every single day and stand in line to sleep on a dirty mat. That's the services we're giving. And it's not enough. It's not enough. And it doesn't stop once you get a house. Because most are so overwhelmed of not knowing how to manage it that they lose it and end up right back where they started. Because nobody's giving them the skill set to figure out, how do I make this work? See, if you're outside, you're in your tent. And you can get some help if you go to a shelter or a transitional facility. But once you get home, the help stops. Why? When that's when you need it the most. You need somebody to help guide you. So my mission is to empower women and give them the tools that they need to build themselves up, brick by brick by brick, until they are so strong in their foundation to remind them that they're beautiful and they can be anything that they want to be. They can turn their story around and they can make anything happen, giving them some value. Because the problem is we have to change the way people are thinking about themselves. We have to change the way that we're thinking about how we're living our lives. You can't just throw somebody in a house. You got to help them start to think about how they're going to live in that house. You have to change the mindset. You got to teach people how to love themselves. Because guess what? Once you start loving yourself, you start loving your life. And when you start loving your life, you start living different. You start moving different. And when you move different, you go different places. Everybody deserves dignity. Everybody deserves to feel loved. It doesn't matter where you're at. We got to stop with the judgment and start figuring out how are we going to build up these people that we're seeing. We are all experiencing homelessness together. Now, yes, let's be clear. You heard from several people from all different walks of life that have all experienced one thing together, homelessness. So we got to go into those dark places and pull people out. We got the power, we just got to plug it into them so they can feel powerful again. Homelessness makes you feel like you're nothing. It's up to us, it's our community. We have to stop looking at everybody else and turning a blind eye. You're turning a blind eye to yourself. It's the truth. Nobody's better than anybody else. She deserves to believe the last part of her life can matter. Everybody deserves a chance to win. And you got to stop looking at everybody else and going, oh, drug addict. That's not always the case. Remember, anybody who was broken was once whole. And we just got to remind them that they can be anything. Everybody deserves to be home. I was homeless. And now I'm going to reach every single person I see and make it my mission to build them up to be better than they ever thought possible. Now I'm going to leave you with this. We all have a purpose, every single one of us here, but our purpose is pending in our pain. And until we figure out how to turn that pain into power, it's useless. I want you to think about what you're thinking about when you think about homelessness and ask yourself why. Thank you.